Ash. Well, thank you all for being here tonight, and you all get an extra badge of awesomeness, not only for coming to this, but for making it all the way to the last talk. So thank you for coming tonight. For a crowd that is this dedicated, do I even need to address this question? I assume that many of you will know what a dramaturg is, but I can't miss the opportunity to throw in my 2 cents from a different perspective than how I usually feel about it. So I took a Strength Finders test at CU this fall, and the number one thing that I care about is context. And for me, that is what dramaturgy is. And as I was reading the description of a person whose number one strength is context, it's you care about the past and history to understand the present. And I feel like that's maybe true for many of you, as if the dramaturg is in your heart, you care about history and context. It makes the play richer. So that's what I'm going to share with you tonight, some historical context, some stuff about the politics and the economy, our playwrights, because I hope that will make the play richer for you, because that's what it does for me. So the historical context. This play, you can't take it with you, premiered on Broadway in 1936. So we're going to talk about the 1930s a little bit, which were bookended by 2 major events. In October of 1929, you have the stock market crash and the onset of the Great Depression. Maybe images like this are coming to your mind. And then in 1941, when Japan bombs Pearl Harbor and we get involved in World War II, that's what lifts America out of the Great Depression. So the stock market crashes, and from 1930 to 1933, these images of people standing in long lines, getting the charity bread. There was a year of apple selling. There was a craze to sell apples on the street because unemployment was rampant. 15 million Americans from 1930 to 33 were unemployed. So about 25% of kind of wage earners at the time were unemployed. Banks were closing. In this time period, 9,000 banks closed and took $2.5 billion in deposits with them. So really staggering poverty. And this was a time when there was no bank regulation and there was no safety net if someone was unemployed or suffering. The government didn't have anything to do about that at this time. So this is kind of an urban image of the situation. Who's maybe seen this photo before? Yeah, Dorothea Lange. This image, the Migrant Mother, was taken in 1936. 1936, same year as our play. Because there was a rural crisis going on as well. At least in the plain states, there was a huge decrease in agricultural work. Oh, hi, welcome. So just think about this, imagine this. In the year 1900, 41% of Americans were living on farms. And by 1930, that had decreased to 25%. So then when the Great Depression hits, banks foreclose on farms. We have natural disasters in the plains, so you get the Dust Bowl time period where all the topsoil is kind of wiped off of the top, and people can't plant crops. So there's huge migration. 2.5 million Americans migrate to the West Coast. So you have all this turmoil and all this suffering in the 1930s. We're going to get to our comedy in a moment. But all of this suffering. So let's talk about the politics. How is the government responding to this decade of crisis? There's always one president scholar in the room. Who was the president when stock market crash happens? 1929. Herbert Hoover. Yes, there's many presidential scholars in the room. So he takes office in March, and the crash happens in October. So that just hits my heart as what a terrible first year on the job. Does anyone, do you know his perspective on this crisis? Yes, it was a very...
balance the budget.
Yeah, that was part of it, absolutely. He did not think it was the government's job to get really involved in how people were suffering. So he did chastise Wall Street. He asked if labor unions wouldn't ask for wage increases. It was all voluntary, and he had a very laissez-faire attitude about this. It was not very active. He told Americans that patience and self-reliance would get them through this passing national incident. So as you can imagine, people were pretty upset about that. The crisis wasn't getting better. So in 1932, FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, he was the New York governor who had the opposite perspective on this problem. Campaigning, he said, I have a new deal for the American people, and we're going to fight this economic crisis like it's a foreign foe. Really criticized Hoover for his see nothing, hear nothing, do nothing government. It's a rough campaign trail, but he wins by a landslide. People want the government to respond to this crisis. So his first 100 days in office. You're probably familiar with this idea of the New Deal. This set of federal laws, he gets right into office and hits the ground running, doing something about this economic crisis. So I love this. Gets into office, he gives banks a 4-day holiday so that people literally cannot go to the bank and take out their money. Radio is a really popular medium at this time. And he did something called Fireside Chats. So directly talking to the American people, asking them, don't take your money out of the bank. In fact, put your money back into the bank and trust these American institutions, trying to win back American confidence in these institutions. So the Fireside Chats, he asked Congress to end prohibition. She's like, oh yeah, prohibition was going on until he asked them to change that, which they did. So immediately gets into office, starts doing things, and by June when he got into office in March, by June, 15 new federal laws had come out. That's like the first New Deal to address the Great Depression. So some of these, there's a lot of acronyms. Some of my favorites, ones that I had already heard of before learning more about the New Deal, the Glass-Steagall Banking Bill. Has anyone heard of that? It's like kind of still in the news. This was a bill that separated Main Street from Wall Street. This idea of we need to protect smaller investors from bigger, riskier investments. So yeah, like I still hear about that in the news. The Tennessee Valley Authority Act gave the government power to go into Tennessee along the Tennessee River and build dams. So you're employing people, giving energy to local communities. And I was working on this talk actually in a coffee shop in Boulder, and someone kind of saw what I was doing, and she said her dad actually worked for the TVA. He was a newspaperman who had lost his job in the Depression and then got employment there. I was like, wow, this is close to people's stories. So that was the first 100 days, the first New Deal. Some people were really excited about this new federal involvement in people suffering. Some people were angry. Roosevelt gets even more aggressive, saying that these big banks had met their match in his first term. Now they were going to meet their master. So he doubles down with more aggressive federal policies known as the Second New Deal. Does anyone know some of the exciting things that came out of the Second New Deal? CCC, absolutely a part of this. The WPA, yes, the Works Progress Administration. So the WPA, I'll say more about it. Listen for that to get referenced in our play as well. So the WPA was employing people on building projects. So building post offices, roads, bridges. They were really specifically instructed not to compete with private sector building. So they're giving people jobs and taking on lots of building. Another wing of the WPA was to fund artists, which, like, do I have any artists in the room who love that? Like government funding for the arts? I love it. So hiring directors, artists. And there's another moment in our play where Penny is dressed as a painter and the character says to her, oh, I didn't know you were working for the WPA. And he's referencing this type of work the WPA was hiring artists. So you can look out for that. And this character actually, Donald, a couple times he says he's on relief from the government. And this is referring to something, an act that happened in the Second New Deal, which was 1935, the Social Security Act. Is anyone familiar with the concept of Social Security? It's like, wow, this is when that started. So the Social Security Act guaranteed pension for older Americans, set up unemployment insurance, So when this Donald says he's on relief, he's referring to this brand new federal program. And it also stipulated that the government would care for dependent children and the disabled. So this idea that the government is really actively involved creating this safety net, this is kind of the first time we're seeing that type of action taken. So I love this as well. This is an advertisement for cornflakes from 1936. And I just want to keep bringing it back to our play as much as possible. We talked in rehearsal about this zany family who a lot of times Alice is going to say, we eat cornflakes, and I'm sick of it. We talked about how maybe that's not just because they're eccentric, but people could afford cornflakes in 1936. So it wasn't just a wacky choice. But I love this advertisement. It says, like, if you're hungry, go for cornflakes. So this family existing in this context. So another really cool influence on this play is the entertainment, what was popular in entertainment in the 1930s. So radio, most families had a radio by the 1930s, and radio is free, so you can listen to it for free. So radio programs are very popular. Is anyone familiar with Amos and Andy? Yeah, we can look at this now and say a pretty problematic practice of two white comedians writing and voicing two black male characters. But it was a very popular radio program, and we're still in the time period where Al Jolson is very popular. So blackface performance is happening, and Amos and Andy is really popular. Who likes a good gangster film? Yes, the 1930s is like the golden era of hard-boiled gangster films. I don't want to get these titles wrong. Has anyone seen Scarface? 1932. Scarface Public Enemy, another film that came out in 1931. And I was reading a bit on why these films are so popular. And it's interesting, the gangster film is still a kind of a version of the American dream, that through your own wiles as a criminal or by force, whatever way you can, you're gonna achieve your dream, whether it's financial success or however you're gonna do it. It's just a distorted version, but it's still kind of going after a version of the American dream. And of course, who recognizes these gentlemen? The Marx Brothers. So they actually got their start in vaudeville as comedians, and then were really successful in the 20s on Broadway. And by the 1930s, their films were starting to come out of Hollywood. So if you've seen Animal Crackers, that was 1930. A Day at the Races was 1937, and A Night at the Opera was 1935. So all along the 30s, they have really popular, like the movie part of their career. And this is something else to listen to in our play, is a reference to Groucho and Harpo. So there's a lot of really contemporary, what would have been very contemporary references in our play. So the Marx Brothers, you can't take it with you. This all kind of fits under the umbrella of the screwball comedy. Now, what would you say, like, what are some things that might define a screwball comedy?
Slapstick.
The slapstick, kind of the physical comedy, absolutely.
Eccentricity.
Being eccentric, characters that are maybe, they have some kind of exaggerated part of themselves, interests. Absolutely. Well, when I started this research, I was like, do I actually know what a screwball comedy is? And you nailed it. That physical comedy, the absurdity, a ridiculous plot that's resolved in some sort of ridiculous way. But a couple other things to look out for. Two things I would say. A trend in the Marx Brothers and in our play as well is the desire to make fun of institutions, whether it's wealth, marriage, banking systems, the government, stereotypes. And the Marx Brothers in particular are really famous for, like, nothing is sacred. They'll make fun of everything and everyone. And in our play as well, Grandpa will talk a lot about the government, how the government's kind of silly. And even in the hard-boiled gangster films, cops are corrupt or inept. So we're seeing a lot of, like, making fun of institutions in this decade of entertainment. Well, the screwball comedy, love will win out in the end. There will usually be reconciliation, and sometimes some sort of nod to humanity being just generous. Okay, so Amanda said this play was not written by Shakespeare. It's true. Do we have any big Kaufman and Hart fans in the room? You're like, I love some of their work. Yeah, I really became a Kaufman and Hart fan through this process. So their story, I love their story of working together. Kaufman, who's at the typewriter, was 15 years older than Moss Hart. And when he already had a very established career as a successful playwright. He was known on Broadway as the great collaborator for really being able to work with people to co-author scripts and musical comedies. Do I have any musical theater nerds in the room? Okay, listen to this awesome list of people that Kaufman worked with. He co-wrote The Coconuts with Irving Berlin, who's amazing. Co-wrote Of Thee I Sing with George and Ira Gershwin, also amazing. And then co-wrote Silk Stockings with Cole Porter. So Gershwin's, Berlin, Cole Porter, that is like a hit list of awesome musical theater people. Yeah, the first Pulitzer book goes to a musical, absolutely. So Kaufman is enjoying a very successful career, a collaborator. Moss Hart in 1929 is a 25-year-old like penniless playwright whose dream is to get on Broadway. And so he's trying to shop around a comedy that he's written, and it gains the attention of a producer named Sam Harris. And Sam Harris is a really established Broadway producer who will go on to produce You Can't Take It With You. And Harris connects Hart and Kaufman and says, maybe you could work with this really well-established playwright. So they work together on this comedy that Hart had drafted called Once in a Lifetime. And the joke is that while they're working on this comedy, it actually is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for Hart to establish his own career. So they have a really hard go of it, trying to work out the kinks of this play. They finally get it to Broadway, and it's a huge success. And it cements their partnership together for the next decade. So is anyone familiar with one of these shows? Maybe The Man Who Came to Dinner is another one of their really well-known plays, co-writing with Richard Rodgers and Lorenz Hart, I'd Rather Be Right. And so what you might notice is that they work together for a decade. They become like best friends during this process, really warm partnership. And in 1940, Moss Hart wants to go like prove himself that he can do it on his own, that he doesn't just need Kaufman. So they end their partnership there, but remain dear friends. They die in 1961, I think like a couple months apart from each other. And Hart spoke at Kaufman's funeral and just like had so much affection for this person who he collaborated with and who mentored him. So I just love that, like Gilbert and Sullivan, Rodgers and Hammerstein, Kaufman and Hart, these Broadway giants. So our play today, I'm so excited. Who here has seen the show before? A version of it, a production? A couple of people? Was anyone in this show before? Maybe a high school production? Who did you play?
What's the girl?
Alice,
Alice.
okay. I could just see that. I love that so much. This is a really commonly produced at high schools and regional theaters. So I knew there's a chance that maybe some of you had been in this show. Who has seen the film version? The Frank Capra, 1938, won an Academy Award, Best Picture. Yeah, so there's a film version that's also very popular. Well, this is wonderful. Who here is like, I'm totally unfamiliar with this play, just happy to be here. Okay, wonderful. Well, this plot recap will matter for you then. So the focus of our play is on these two young people making a connection, trying to find love. So Alice has been working on Wall Street at Kirby & Co. as kind of an administrative assistant, we think, and has started a romance with Tony, the son of Mr. Kirby of Kirby & Co. And so they've been going out together and an engagement happens, but Alice is really afraid that these two families, the Kirbys, who are super wealthy, Wall Street, this is in the 1930s and they're still super wealthy, doing banking on Wall Street, that they won't mix with her family. And you brought up the word eccentric. Does anyone know some of the the ways the Vanderhoff, Sycamore, Carmichael family is a little eccentric? Yes.
I just have this image of somebody dancing around the stage and doing ballet for the entire play.
It's gorgeous, isn't it? Essie. Essie wants to be a ballet dancer. She's been training for 8 years. She's technically terrible, but it's her passion to be a dancer. So yeah, you have Essie dancing around the house, making candy as well. Her husband, Ed, likes to make prints, and play the xylophone, which is wonderful. And Alice's parents, Paul and Penny, Paul spends his day in the basement creating fireworks, and Penny spends her time writing plays. Like, that's what she's doing right now. She could be painting, she could be playwriting. There's a long and colorful history. And Martin, Grandpa, the kind of leader of this household, he collects snakes, he goes to commencement ceremonies, he owns property, so he has income that way, but he's not paying income tax. So this kind of wacky family, Alice says, these worlds will never mix. And when Tony brings his family over so that the families can meet each other, there's a chance he does that on the wrong night. And as you can imagine, chaos ensues. Chaos. So the themes. What are some themes that I would draw your attention to? Is anyone familiar with Joseph Campbell? Yes, I love that, like a crowd that knows who Joseph Campbell is. It's amazing. He has written a lot about mythology and trends that we see in mythology and how they're present in modern storytelling. So we can attribute this quote of "follow your bliss" to Joseph Campbell's thinking. This was an interview. He said this later in his life, kind of the end of his career as a professor. And it's not just follow your bliss, do whatever you want, whatever makes you happy, but this idea of doing what you love, the road will kind of unfold. So we see that in the play. Grandpa is going to talk a lot about, do you actually like what you do? Do you enjoy that? Like, someone else might enjoy being on Wall Street, but do you enjoy that? So this theme of, are you doing what gives you bliss? What gives you joy? Are you doing something because someone tells you should do it, whether that's your parents, society, or are you following your bliss? And the second theme I'll draw your attention to. So Julia Halston played Gay Wellington in the 2004 Broadway revival. And I love that she says this play, it boils down to family, which everyone in this room, can we guess, like, has a family? Family dynamics that are kind of interesting in one way or another, that you're nervous how the world might feel about your family. So I love that theme. Things boil down to the family. And she draws our attention to how Kaufman and Hart value humor, which we talked in rehearsal, this idea of quit your job, follow your bliss. Is that just like white privilege? Good for you, Grandpa. We had an actor actually draw our attention to other communities living in oppressive situations or hardship that find humor and find resilience. Those were the words she used, resilience and humor. So we're finding this family kind of in that context, living in the Great Depression and finding humor and resilience. I don't know if you've struggled with that looking at this play, like, good for you, quit your job and do what you love. Who can do that? But I think there's another way to think about it. So if you're still with me, I will talk to you about some production history, very interesting stuff, and then we'll take it over to Carolyn. So this play premiered on Broadway in 1936. The original production was really well received. It won the Pulitzer, which some people in the New York theater community felt it did not deserve. And Edna Ferber, if you know her from like the Showboat connection, she had some private material published where she said, yeah, this play didn't deserve it, no play did. So some people think this play is too light, but the Pulitzer goes to a play that shows the power of the stage and represents American life. So I can see the case for this play. The film version came out in 1938, so the film was running in theaters while You Can't Take It With You was still playing on Broadway. And this was the first play to have the film adaptation going while you could still buy a ticket. Usually they would close, like there was less interest in the theater version once you could go see the movie. This was the You Can't Take It With You was the first time that Frank Capra and Jimmy Stewart worked together. If you're like a Jimmy Stewart Capra fan. And so only a couple of you have seen the movie, right? A couple of people? Yeah, it's actually pretty different than the play. If you recall, the film is really situated in Grandpa kind of saving the community by not selling his property to Mr. Kirby, who wants to buy the land and tear it all down. And our play is really focused on the dynamics of these two families meeting each other. So there's a very mysterious production on Broadway in 1945 that only lasted for 17 performances. It's kind of this like bizarre blip on the radar. I couldn't find any reviews of it. It's just 17 performances. That's not great. I was wondering if it had to do something with like wartime context, but this kind of blip on the radar, 17 performances. The real kind of major revival happened in the 1960s, which I think is interesting of what you know about the 1960s, a lot of social upheaval in that time period as well, this play about overcoming that difference and kind of understanding each other. So in the 80s, another big revival on Broadway, and the review said something this production did really well was ground these characters, like make them real people, not just these zany, like screwball comedy caricatures of people. There's some like humanity to these people who've lived through the Great Depression. The 2014 revival, I think you're gonna recognize some of these faces. Really well received on Broadway. I think part of that is like the celebrity clout. Annalee Ashford played Essie. Rose Byrne, maybe you know her from some movies, played Alice. And I think the second person great, who could be great compared to Sam Gregory, he's number one. But James Earl Jones played Grandpa. Like, that's absolutely incredible. There's some videos online of him doing the grace, the speeches, praying for dinner that are just so great. And James Earl Jones, again, he's number two to Sam Gregory, but an excellent, excellent performance. So that was the last time it was on Broadway. It was 2014. So another really cool production that I think it's worth turning our attention to, Cornerstone, Cornerstone Theater. So this is a company in LA that was co-founded by Bill Rausch. Any Shakespeare nerds out there? Yeah, Amanda.
Yeah, Oregon Shakes.
Oregon Shakes, yeah, the artistic director at Oregon Shakes. He co-founded this company that is specifically interested in taking classics and reimagining them to tell like urban and rural like stories of communities. So in 2003, which is really cool that you're here, Jack, because you brought my attention to this when we talked about it in class last semester. They took this play, 2003, right on the tail of September 11th, and they went to a Muslim center in LA, got the blessing of the Kaufman and Hart estate, and worked with the center to reimagine the story of You Can't Take It With You with these professional actors and community actors at this Muslim center. So Penny is reimagined as writing Muslim sitcoms, so she's still a writer. Essie is trying to be a rapper, but Alice is in hijab. So they adapted this to the community that they were trying to represent. But they were really excited not only to have a conversation with people outside the Muslim community about the humanity and the love in the family, but they had some really cool conversations within the Muslim community about family. One of the actors wanted to make a relationship same-sex, and so he had a conversation with his community about what it felt like for him to be a queer person in the Muslim community. So this is a really, I think, cool production. The legacy of this idea of your family, they're kind of eccentric was a great word, and you feel like you're the normal one. So the Munsters is based off of this story. There's so many versions of this where a wacky family meets kind of a straight-laced family and the chaos that ensues. Does anyone else like have a favorite, or can you think of one?
The Addams Family musical.
The Addams Family musical. I love that. I'm a musical theater people. Yes. I think of a show like Friends, where you have these people living in this gorgeous apartment in New York, kind of wacky characters coming in and out. The Odd Couple, yeah, like Neil Simon. That's absolutely the very straight-laced and the wacky. I love that. Small family. Definitely The Odd Couple. So I'm going to turn our attention now to our production at CSF this summer. Carolyn, would you like to come up? Would you like to stay where you're at?
Yeah.
Come, please, you're the seat of honor.
Oh, golly.
It is
Then
so.
I can't see. Oh, you're still
Yeah.
going to talk, aren't you?
No. Well, I'm going to talk, just set you up. I think
Okay.
when we get to this point, it's really exciting to know why we chose to do this play. Why now in 2018? Why in Boulder, Colorado? Like, why this play? Why this play now? So I can keep talking about things, but are you ready to chat
I'm ready
about?
to chat.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm so excited to hear from you. Thanks. Thanks for.
I'm so excited.
Okay.
So when Timothy Orr, who's the producing artistic director of Colorado Shakespeare Festival, talked to me last year about what I might be interested in directing, we were on the phone, and I said, well, I actually have kind of a wacky idea. He's like, okay. I said, I really want to do You Can't Take It With You. And he gasped. And I thought, oh dear. He goes, you're not going to believe this, but that is exactly the play that I've had in my head to talk to you about. And he told me at the time that he was for sure going to put Richard III on the season, and that he wanted to see the family dynamic told from a very Machiavellian, I guess, greedy, ambitious, horrible, murdery kind of way, and from a love, butterflies, puppies, and hearts kind of way. And I think he was really onto something, because we've found with this group of actors that are one night doing Richard and then coming into You Can't Take It With You, yet portraying a family. I mean, they're both family stories about how similar the themes are in these two plays, yet told from a really different point of view. And I've been thinking a lot as I've been preparing to come here to direct this about the nature of a classic. I make my living pretty much exclusively directing Shakespeare all over the country. Occasionally I'll get to do something else, but it's often Shakespeare. And so I'm immersed in the classics. And what's your definition of a classic? What does that mean to you?
Timelessness, and you could do it, for 400 years, and it still.
And it still
speaks.
seems.
Yeah.
It still seems current. Yes. I think of a classic as something that definitely endures. And I also think of it as something that is an exemplary example. It's like the best of its kind, the best of its style, or the best of its period. And certainly Shakespeare is that. He's endured, and I think we consider him the best. Well, You Can't Take It With You has a really interesting statistic. Last year, NPR took a poll and found that You Can't Take It With You appears as one of the top 10 produced plays every single year since its rights became available in 1939. So we're talking about an 80-year-old play that is one of the 10 top produced plays in every one of those years except one, which was the year 2016. And I don't know why exactly that's true, although I have some ideas. But I just find that really interesting. And I think it's because it's become an American classic. And the cynic in me sort of says, well, sure, there's no salty language, it's not really going to offend anybody, it's got lots of roles. So high schools and community theaters and colleges kind of eat it up for that reason, I think. It's become practically unproducible for professional theater because of the size of its cast. It's got 17 characters. But it's perfect for a Shakespeare Festival when you've already got 17 actors employed in a Shakespeare play to put them in this big American classic. It's rich. It's a prime example of American comedy, and by two of the masters of their craft. And we are mining things. We're finding things in this play every day in rehearsal that I didn't even know were in it. My greatest hope for an audience to go away with this, I think, is that they'll be a little bit touched by the Sycamore family and their crazy wackiness, and that they'll get swept up in the spirit of them, of their belief that anybody and everybody is welcome at their table. It doesn't matter their nationality, their color, their religious belief. They welcome everyone. I hope people get swept up in their gentle lessons of kindness and acceptance, and their philosophy that you should live life to the fullest. That's what you should do. And of course, that just us coming together into a theater to laugh together will somehow affect your day and maybe even your week, which I think is great. So I'm excited, I'm delighted, I'm having a great time with my cast. I hope you'll come, and I hope you'll have a really good time.
Such a treasure to hear from the director, like the heart of this show. And another treasure that I'll direct your attention to before I have some questions for you. So this is a sketch of our set design. And one thing we know about the Vanderhoff, Carmichael, Sycamore clan is that they've had lots of hobbies, lots of like crafty like activities, playwriting and painting, collecting snakes. And so I asked Caitlin kind of how this came to be, but some CSF staff and employees are contributing crafts to the set. So our outdoor stage manager loves origami, and so all of the origami pieces on the set, she created herself. I hear Heidi, we have a contribution from you. Do you want to say what it is?
I'm working on a cross-stitch sampler that we're imagining Grandma made.
Isn't that so neat? So those are some nuggets that you can look for when you see this set. So that, as we head into our final moments of kind of discussion, some questions that I have for you, and you can ask questions of us as well, is what resonates for you about this play? Not many of you have seen it or have you been in it, but what are you looking forward to about our production? Does anything about the context help you, give you new insight about the play? Does anyone have a thought on these questions? Amanda.
I have a thought not necessarily about the play, but
Okay.
mentioning the WPA I found really interesting because I believe the Mary Rippon Theater was constructed as part of the WPA. I could be completely wrong.
It was the same era.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's really interesting that the physical space, I mean, this play is not going to be in the Rippon, it'll be in the indoor stage, but the fact that the place where I work was built during this time is very, very, very cool.
Yeah, I don't know if anyone has a story or a connection like that, but this time period and the Great Depression, I feel like a lot of people are very intimately connected with or have stories, how it affected them, their parents, their grandparents, something like we still live with the physical like result of the WPA. We don't have the Federal Theater Project anymore, but like my parents will say, we use nice things because their parents like never could because they lived through the Great Depression. So like, I don't know, does anyone have like a story like that to impact? We'll just wait for it. It'll come up in like talking with other people. People have talked to me in coffee shops like, yeah, sir.
Yeah, the WPA was paving a street just it went across the street that we lived on. And I used to go out there, I was just a wee kid, went out there and watched the workers. I would get my mother to make me sandwiches, and I'd go out and eat sandwiches when they took their lunch break. And I learned how you mix concrete. And there are a couple of my socks that are still in that.
The WPA left a mark on your street, and you left your mark on the WPA on that project.
Somehow I took my shoes and socks off. I got the shoes, but socks disappeared, but I think they went into the concrete.
I hope so. That's awesome.
I heard that my grandmother on one side fed people during the Depression. There would be marks on the sidewalk that let people know that she would feed them. My other grandma did not feed people. So.
Yeah, that's a really interesting story.
Yeah, my grandmother used to feed some of the homeless, that I guess hobos or people. She was only about a block from the railroad track. And I guess some of them would come up the hill around to her back door, and she'd give them something to eat. I think she was a known destination.
I love that, really supporting one of many people who didn't have enough to eat. Yeah.
My mother left high school to work during the Depression because the family couldn't. Her mother had died, and she had 2 siblings, and my grandfather was working in a factory, and so they all quit school and went to work, all 4 of them.
Thanks for sharing that story. Yeah, there's so many like ways that people's lives were just kind of the direction they were on was changed or cut short. What happened? I hate to ignore this side of the room. Yeah. Anything you're excited about for this production? Anything that's resonating? Yeah, Jack.
Well, to kind of go back to the discussion we had in class last semester, I think what really resonates with a lot of people is just the family dynamic. Because everyone comes from a weird family somewhere. Like, no one has a normal family.
That's so true.
Yeah, so I think it's one of the things that you were talking about, like it being such a classic play, is that we can all see ourselves in one character or another.
I love that. And I can say, as someone who got married last year, the idea of your family meeting someone else's family, it's terrifying, even if everyone's wonderful. Everyone's wonderful. It's just really scary. Like, what weird thing? Please don't say this. Please don't do that. Please don't mention this other thing that we talk about all the time. But it's, kind of an experience you can relate to, your family meeting someone else's family, or just the dynamics that happen inside the home no one else gets to see. And this play is someone else shows up on the wrong night and sees everyone in their glory. They're just how they are with each other. Yeah. Yeah, sir.
Another one for you, the birdcage.
I love. Who doesn't?
Yeah, it is.
So this thing's never gonna end, although we're living in the Boulder bubble now, and so it seems to me you can't be eccentric anymore. I mean, it's really, really hard. I don't know if you've had any trouble, finding a way of getting through to your eccentricity, but I'm sure you did.
I don't know. You put a group of actors in a room, they're going to find they're weird. They're just their weird is going to come out. It just is. But even the quote unquote straight-laced family, the Kirbys, are also weird in their own way. So I don't know. Maybe the theme is people are weird. I don't know.
Yeah, I know. Right, Tony kind of brings that up of like, my father has this habit with orchids and puts a lot of his money into orchids, and his mother likes spiritualism. So when you hear them talk about spiritualism, that was this belief that you could communicate with the dead through a medium that was really popular in the 1920s. And then a lot of like frauds were discovered, and so it was kind of debunked. And so Tony tells Alice, like we talked about in rehearsal, as if he's never told anyone else, my mother believes in spiritualism. It's like we all have our little things. Yeah. Yeah, Heidi.
I'll throw out there, we did a book club over the past several months, and when we read this play and we're talking about it, one of the things that kind of dominated our conversation that I think is really interesting is the relationship to work, to employment, to productivity, and to the American dream, and who gets to claim that. So I think there's such an interesting thing that we have this family of people who follow their passions, and we're pretty sure they're not all that good at any of these passions. But there were a couple of comments, in the conversation round, well, she should be better. She should do it for a job. And I was like, I'm having a lot of my own questions about defining ourselves by our jobs and defining ourselves by what we're good at and what people are willing to pay us money for. And what does that say about this sense of American everything, is there room for people to simply say, I'm not doing this for money, I'm doing this because I love it and I want to get better at it, even if in the end, my pretty good is nowhere on the level of anyone who does it for money. I do it because I love it. And where's the balance between that and the, I'm good at this and I'm gonna get paid for it, and this is how I'm gonna get rich. And there's a whole miasma of like American identity, I think, lodged in that question that I think is very present in this play.
Absolutely. I'm so glad you would bring that up. And having a hobby that you do because you enjoy it versus like this trend to monetize it. Like, you should put your embroidery on Etsy and start to bring in a side income.
But then it would be work.
Right. Does anyone have a hobby like that? I know there's a whittler in the room. Likes to whittle. Rose?
Yeah, my painting. Everyone's like, sell your painting. Well, I don't know how to sell my painting.
That's true. I've said that to you because they're so good, but I love that you just preserve, like, it's just between you and your art.
Yeah. And they're hanging in my office. I give them but I don't, like, I never get paid for it.
I like trying to monetize it.
What I do it all the time is like, over, like I just gave him a Father's Day gift that was like a platter that I painted at like the pottery shop. Or like we did that for like my cousin's wedding presents. Or like for people's birthday presents. I'm like, what do you like? I'll draw it for you. You know? But I don't monetize it.
That's kind of lovely. So you still offer it to people as a gift. That's in the play. Like Essie makes her candy and, you know, the family eats it for dinner. Cornflakes and candy and some kind of meat. Any other questions for us? Yeah.
I have a question sort of about the bigger picture of this season, and I think we may have been slightly disappointed when we saw there were 2 non-Shakespeare plays. Although I have to say Treasure Island, oh my gosh, that was one of our favorites ever. That was so much fun. But we're curious why, and I was curious why this play, but you explained that really nicely. I'm curious why this and Cyrano both this season instead of just one non-Shakespeare play.
Yeah, that's funny. I've asked at least Tim a similar question, and I don't know, Amanda, do you want to speak to it? Or? Yeah.
Tim, where are you?
Yeah.
I mean, I think as a Shakespeare festival, we're always, of course, mostly interested in producing Shakespeare plays, but we also like the idea of bringing in Shakespeare plays that speak alongside Shakespeare. And so, you know, for me, especially Cyrano de Bergerac has the kind of scale and the size of a Shakespeare play, the focus on language, the sort of lift of that. Yeah, I don't recall another season in recent years that we've done 2 non-Shakespeares, but I think it just sort of was something. Tim was interested in the parallel of Richard and You Can't Take It With You, and we also wanted something of size on the outdoor stage, and Cyrano was something we were all really interested in. So that doesn't really answer your question, but you just that there's no formula, I guess. Things that speak to Shakespeare and work with Shakespeare, and sometimes mostly are Shakespeare.
I love that, the Shakespeare adjacent show, and we've done, yeah. Do you have other?
Well, I was going to say too that there are only, well, depending on who you ask, 38 to 40 Shakespeare plays, and I think there was just a feeling of, I think Amanda said it very well, that particularly with Cyrano, it's in the theater world, it's kind of considered in that vein of Shakespeare because of its size, because of its poetry. And this particular translation is rhyming couplets. I mean, it's all about language. And it, I think, fits very well in with a festival that's devoted to classic plays about language. And Rostand, I think, is very much considered a Shakespeare, like, you know, in his way, an equivalent of Shakespeare for him, from his country and from his time period.
Yeah, and I think something that was also very interesting about doing You Can't Take It With You for us as a Shakespeare festival, Carolyn pointed out the size of this play, that it's not going to get produced a lot. And we were also really interested in, professional companies don't produce this very much.
They don't do it.
If you've seen this play, you've probably seen your high school cousin performing in it. So we were also really interested in what happens when you get the best of the best together in the context of a Shakespeare festival, but you change things up a little bit and you give audiences a taste of something they might not know they wanted but it turns out actually what you've been missing all these years is you can take it with you at a Shakespeare festival.
Yeah, you might. I mean, I think about, I grew up not very far away from Ashland, Oregon, and so my entire, formative years were spent with my parents. We went every year. And they do 11 or 12 plays, 4, maybe 5 of which are Shakespeare, and the other 5 to 6 are not Shakespeare plays. And I found that it would be, I don't even know if I can articulate this very well, but that the Shakespeare would help illuminate the plays that were non-Shakespeare and vice versa because of words, because of language. And that often, even contemporary plays, which are very often very terse, the words are so carefully chosen, as are Shakespeare's words. And I don't know, I felt like it rounded my experience of theater more than detracted from it. But you'd have to ask Tim specifically your question, because I don't know that answer. That's just my opinion.
I love that. Well, thanks. Thank you, everyone. Amanda, are we ready for the big?
I think we're ready for the big drawing.
The big drawing.
Thank you to Bianca and to Carolyn for being here.